Hello folks, I hope you're having a great day today. Hey, today I want to take a look at an 1820 work. It's called Symzonia, and it was published, like I said, in 1820, a couple hundred years ago, roughly. It's subtitled Voyage of Discovery, and it was written by Captain Adam Seaborn, which is most definitely a pseudonym, and we'll talk about who probably actually wrote it a little bit later. It has a lot of Robinson Crusoe style things to it. It has some science fiction elements to it as well. It was written in kind of the prescient dawn of science fiction at about the same time as Mary Shelley. So other things, it does have some science fiction elements to it, which we'll take a look at in a moment, but it's not as much as you might expect. But there are some definitely in there that we'll talk about, and how some of those things are kind of seen. This is the first story that's kind of this sort of Hollow Earth story subset voyage. So we're going to take a look at it. But before I do that, let's talk a little bit about the Hollow Earth and what that was. And when Haley was doing a lot of his, Haley was doing about 100 years prior, was doing a number of his works, discoveries, philosophies, and so forth. He published this idea that perhaps Earth might be hollow and have a hollow core. It wasn't a proven thing, it was just a theory, and not even like a super scientific theory, but he just thought that it might be possible that it's hollow, as one of his sort of proposals. A scientist in about the mid-1750s had proven that it was probably not likely to be the case, and then about 20 years later in the early 1770s, it was proven definitively that it could not be the case and ruled out as a possibility by a number of scientific experiments that were happening at that time. So about 5 or 6 years before America even became a country, and it declared its independence, we found out, of course, that the hollow Earth theory cannot be possible. It was disproven completely and totally. And then about 25 years later, in the early 18-teens, right about 1815 or so, actually, I think, there's a gentleman named John Symmes who begins to believe that he has proven that Edmund Halley's theory is actually true, and that it actually is a hollow Earth. And he has a number of kind of pseudo-scientist concepts that he puts together as part of this narrative that he believes that there actually is a hollow world. He thinks, for example, there's an icy zone between the 70th and the 80th parallel, where the things are that we have seen with these icebergs and such. But then once you get above the 80th parallel or below it, then you will actually find that it gets warmer and warmer as those parts of the year have months and months where they have sunlight and no nighttime. There's just constant day and sun, and in those places, of course, it's going to be warmer and warmer. So there's not going to be a lot of these things. He proposes that Earth is actually a number of hollow concentric circles, if you will, that have a section, and there's a hole at each pole that you could sail into and through. This is he believes he's proven this. He puts together some postulations, which aren't particularly, they don't refute anything, right? It's more pseudoscientist than actual scientist. He believes his theory so much, he publishes it. He sends it to various world leaders, expecting it's going to make him famous, put him on the map. It does not. I think a lot of people are like, what is this American thing he's doing? This proven before America was even a nation. What does he think? What does he think he's got? Nothing. There's no scientific evidence for this. Has been disproven as a theory. Well, anyway, there are a few people locally who do not kind of discredit him immediately. Some people that he'll talk to in his lectures that kind of gravitate to him, but his theory isn't picking up as much steam as you might think it would. So this novel comes out in 1820, right after he'd been discredited by the world, and people said, nope, this is not actually there. And so this novel is published by Captain Adam Seaborn. Captain Adam Seaborn, there's no record of him actually existing. It's his narrative journey to the region, as outlined by Symmes. Most people believe that Symmes actually was the one who created this, and this is his work, and that he just wrote it under a pseudonym, believing that a fictional account of the world could capture the populace's imagination in a way that his more erudite philosophical musings wouldn't. That this would ignite a spark, and the people would come to believe it, go do expeditions to go prove it or disprove it, as the case may be. So he creates this idea. So Captain Adam Seaborn is basically going to be going over his journey to the Hollow World and back again. And that's the journey of the story. Now, this particular version of it starts on page 15, and it goes through page 119. So it's about 100 pages long, and this re-edition, and my version was re-edited and republished just last year. So you can actually see an early version of it with some maps, charts, that sort of thing, as it was initially published. If you want, and I'll link you to it later on in my comments below for you to get more of sort of an interesting sort of undertaking of it. I really enjoy this core idea of subterranean sort of voyages and expeditions. This was the first Hollow World expedition, because that theory had just been kind of come out by Symmes. This was the first thing probably written by Symmes himself. But it's the first one of these sort of Hollow World expeditions that are out there. Whole civilizations are going to be down there. There are some underground expeditions that were occasionally here and there. They weren't published in English. I did some research. There are a few of them, but they're more like somebody fell through a cave and there was like in this big giant cavern, there's people that live there or something like that. This idea of an entire expedition to a Hollow World, this is the first time this appears. This is going to be codified, I think, very nicely in Edgar Rice Burroughs' At the Earth's Core. You'll see other writers like Jules Verne's Journey to the Center of the Earth that has a similar sort of underground exploration and expedition theme to it, but none of them had this sort of Hollow World concept with them. This is the first time you'll see that, and most of the other ones are just more underground travels or happenstance. I fell down there through a hole or in a cave, and I fell down. And look, rather than this actual journey to the Hollow Earth. And many of Edgar Rice Burroughs' tropes that he's going to use in At the Earth's Core are going to be very, very true. He's going to tap right into John Symmes's theories and Symzonia, in that sort of, hey, you can sail down there from the poles or holes, all these sorts of things. And a lot of his sort of ideas are going to be true. Now, he actually has a lot more scientific ideas for At the Earth's Core, which we'll talk about later. I haven't reviewed his story yet, but he has more of a scientific approach to what this would look like, whereas this one doesn't have as much of a scientific approach to the center of the Earth. But again, this is kind of proto-science fiction in that sense anyway. So what's happening is that our Captain Adam Seaborn, just as a quick synopsis of the novel, is seeking out to prove he believes that Symmes' theories are correct, and he's seeking out to prove it and to journey to the Earth. So he's seeking out the opportunity to do this. He wants to get past the icy rings, get to the pole, and find some stuff down there, and then find an entrance and sail into the center of the Earth. So that's what he's trying to do. So but the problem is that there are no ships that exist to do that. So he builds one. At that time, there were no steam vessels that could work on salt water at the time. They were only freshwater only. They've been tried out very unsuccessfully, so he manages to design and build one that can do that. He adds a number of stuff to it, and he'll add more and more details about the ship that he's building. So he has to design and create a ship for this long sea journey that will keep them at sea for at least 3 years. So he has 3 years worth of supplies, 3 years worth of stuff, 3 years worth of sailors, that sort of thing. And he's going to set out on an expedition heading south towards what would be Antarctica, although Antarctica wasn't a thing yet. But it would be down through that area. So you're going to find he's going to head down there. He's going to start at the Falkland Islands and Rio de Janeiro, and then down to the Falkland Islands, pop on over looking for some lands. He finds some other islands like the Sandwich Islands and such. And then he'll start to find his own lands. He'll find a continent down there, which was not known at the time, which he'll name after himself. His last name is Seaborn, so it's Seaborn's land. Which he'll land on and set up like a colony at. Every single time he finds a place, he claims it for Christianity, for Christian America. So he sets up the U.S. flag in those places, puts up plaques in order to engulfen himself as wealth in his American nation. So he'll claim them for America. He'll regularly name the things that he finds after himself or members of his crew that helped him find that or who are loyal to him. There is one person who he's having difficulties with, Mr. Slim, who is pushing back against his voyages. For example, when he says early on that he intends to go south into the icy areas, and it's like approaching winter. This guy pushes back and says, we all know that that stuff's frozen, and there was a ship lost in Greenland because they did the same thing. They pushed through and they were captured and trapped up there, and then they all died because they didn't have enough food and it was cold and froze in on them. We don't want that to happen to us, which, by the way, is a very reasonable pushback on saying, why are you sure? Are you sure, right? But the captain, we shouldn't do that, and the captain was like, yeah, we're going to do it. He was just not listening to him at all. And the captain will tell us on many times, he just immediately dismisses Mr. Slim and rates him as a troublemaker and a rabble-rouser. And he's like, I'm not having this on my ship. And so he immediately takes a cold hand with Mr. Slim and will have it for the rest of the mob. And arguably, Mr. Slim will turn into the antagonist of the story for that, I think, partly that reason. Anyway, they'll find Seaborn's land, they'll set up some seal catching stations there, and then they'll continue to head south, and they'll eventually arrive. And he tells his men, he's not telling them, hey, I'm chasing a hollow world. He knows that they wouldn't believe him. But he says, hey, let's sail around the world to get to China to drop off our the seals and stuff that we're capturing, all those seal furs that we've already gathered. They've already gathered thousands of seal furs already. They actually captured 6,000 seal furs in one day in this area because the seals hadn't retreated back yet. And he believes, like Symmes, that these animals, the seals and stuff, are migrating from the inner world opening that's nearby. So he thinks that that's where they're all coming from. So anyway, he sets down there and sails, and ultimately sails right on into the hollow world from the southern pole. He'll find a small island there after sailing for a while. His men start to push back on him and saying, hey, after like a voyage of almost a week without finding anything or seeing anything, like, hey, you need to start thinking about turning back. And he agrees that by January 1st, if he hasn't found any land, that they'll turn back. But ultimately, by like almost a little before Christmas, they'll find land, a small island that he calls Token Island? No. Yeah, Token Island, after a token of appreciation because he found the island. And then they'll land there, set up some camps, get a bunch of turtles, harvest turtle shells from them, which are valuable at that time, and then move on. And ultimately they're going to run into this nation of people that live in the hollow world. They're called Symzonia, that he calls Symzonians. He names them after Symmes, the guy who created the theory, who has proven to be correct. And such. And then the novel's going to change into a utopian style novel for about half of it. You had about a good third that began it, and then you're going to have half of it in Symzonia, and then the last 1/6 or so is going to be the end. So that's kind of how the novel's kind of divided up. Its first act gets you to Symzonia, the second act is a big log act, and then the third act gets you back home. So that's kind of how the novel's actually divided up. Then they're in Symzonia, meeting this utopian culture that's down there. They have a very different style of government, very different style of people, many different things are happening down there. He begins to set up some conversation with them after being with them for a few months and learning their language. They learn a lot faster than he does. He appears very differently to them. They're very pale white, and they're about 5 feet tall. And they have, he learns more and more about their race and culture. And as you do so, you'll find out that these are people who believe in doing things for the right reasons, to help others for utility. Utility is kind of like one of their ultimate goods. They're also Christian too. In fact, they ultimately accept him as a fellow person when, after having their initial language things and being like, this guy looks really nasty, and me, he's got weapons and so forth, he actually bows down to pray in supplication to God. And then they're like, anybody who prays to God must be all right, and so they accept him because they're Christians, obviously Christians too, and so they're that's what their initial introduction is. He'll meet the leader of the land, which is called the best man, be introduced to their culture, which has a heavily democratic, egalitarian society, where anybody who is charged with not having the nation's best interest, but instead their own personal one, will be banned from public service permanently, and people who are undesirable will actually be shipped up to the north, on the other far side of the of this inner world, and he calls it the internal world, and to be forever banished from the nation. So that's how they kind of get rid of their unruly aspects, by banishing them. So everybody who is here buys into this idea of helping others, being there for others, not doing things overly materialistically. They live in comfort, but they don't live in material wealth. They don't have like 2-story houses, 3-story houses. They don't have a bunch of adornments on their clothes. They're a very simple yet a very intellectual people, and they have invented things that we haven't. For example, they have flying ships, and I don't mean flying airships with their little bubbles and hydrogen. I mean that might have existed about this time. I mean like actual flying ships that they've developed. Their ships are also, they've actually developed technology for their sailing vessels that are much faster than the ones that we have, a system of technology for them. And you'll also learn later on that they've developed a system of defense too, which has these big giant, they call them engines of defense, but basically they're big giant tank-ish, I mean this is proto-tanks, but they're basically movable tanks on wheels that have these giant flamethrowers that will shoot out in all directions, and they can move in and about the battlefield. They call them engines of defense that they use to protect themselves. You'll learn more about the culture. Obviously, again, that's a big part of this, is who this culture is, why this culture is. Ultimately, you'll find out that they don't like our good captain, and they're going to kick him out and ban any future contact with his people because they believe that they are overly barbarous, antagonistic, militaristic. They enslave their people. They kill each other with soldiers. They're way too invested in doing bad things. They're sinful, evil, decadent people who they believe having contact with their culture, they actually will ostracize the ship and send it back out. And that's the end of the second act. I'll leave you with the third act because it's pretty quick, and the resolution as to what happens after they get exiled and banned from it. And even say, hey, if you guys come back, we're going to have our engines of defense ready and we'll be willing to use them against you, because got to protect our people. So anyway, and that's kind of the story. Now, I want to move into some of the analysis of the story. First of all, this has a lot of Robinson Crusoe in it. I mentioned this before. Robinson Crusoe had come out in 1719, about 101 years prior to the publication of this novel. And it was one of the most influential novels of its day. And it gave rise to a number of sort of Robinsonettes that had other people that were dealing with sort of Robinson Crusoe style things that were happening. And one of the key aspects of Robinson Crusoe that I think many reviewers actually miss, and I think if you go back and read Robinson Crusoe, you'll see this is actually a key part of this novel. It's a Christian novel. The person who wrote it and the person who's retelling the story talks about his Christian identity, is praying, he's meditating, he misses reading the Bible, right? He has this sort of religious thing. He looks to say Friday, right? He is writing as a Christian, and he sees the world through Christian eyes, typical Christian eyes of the day in the early 1700s, and you see that here too. He treats himself as Christian. He claims lands like a Christian would, rather than those other. He's like, if there had been record in the logs of people being there who hadn't been Christian on the islands that he's discovering and the continent that he finds, then he would not have claimed them. But because no Christians had found them yet, they were free. So only Christians could claim land under, Seaborn's, and this is apparently the rule of the day according to Seaborn. Like, he just knows that there's this rule of Christian, and going out there trying to save people, witness to people, right? Those sorts of things. He definitely, and again, this idea that the people down there are saved, are Christians too, and they recognize him when he bows after having all these initial difficulties, and like, what are you doing? You're looking really weird. They do believe that their people who they sent up over thousands and thousands of years could be the descendants of the outside people. There is this potentiality. It's never specifically stated. One of the wise people in there. The society has three separate classes: the wise, the good, and the useful. And those are basically, most of the people are in one of those three classes. And those each have ruling councils that will advise. And one of the wise actually says, hey, I think actually makes the claim that these people actually were from, that the humans are out in the external world actually were descended from them, the unfit that were exiled up north. Because that's right near the opening to the outside world that they now know, and also that's where we think a lot of our people came from, like the people in the Americas, and they are much more physically similar after living up there in the far north, where they're exposed. They have darker skin, and they were taller, bigger, stronger, and have a much more sort of they look much more similar to what these humans look like. So there is this theory that maybe the humans are descended from the people that were exiled. It's not ever really proven in the novel one way or the other. We do know of another society that's down this way too, that's deeper into the thing that they never wind up sailing to as well. And there's talk about a future expedition mounted to go check out this second civilization that they hear about from the Symzonians, but which they don't actually go to. There are some weird and bad things in the story. Adam is not a nice person. The Captain Adam Seaborn, he is not a nice person. For example, I'll give you a few examples. He's not nice to keeping. For example, he will threaten when his people come to him and say, "Hey, we need to turn back. Hey, we need to do these things." He'll threaten them, and he'll be like, "Hey, if you guys, kick me off or drop me off on an island and mutiny against me, I will burn the books that got you here and destroy the instruments and toss them out a window so that you won't be able to recover them, and thus you'll be stranded here, and none of you guys can get back." He is a man of power, and he does not like it if somebody challenges him or questions him at all. And even near the end, he basically said, "These things are decided when leaving the society. These things are decided. We're not doing these. But here are 2 or 3 things that I'll take your input in on. What do you want to do? Do you want to go catch rock turtles? Something like that. But the rest of the things are all decided. But I'll give you 2 or 3 you guys talk about." He's not an egalitarian person. He will shut down any conversation that disagrees with him. And he won't tell them why. He won't explain it. He'll just shut it down. He's the captain of his boat. And he'll even say this early on, as soon as, let me see if I can find that for you. Because I read this book. I finished it up this morning. So let me see if I can actually find that line for you. I didn't bookmark it. No, I'll actually edit it into the bottom so I can show you the line in the bottom of this video for you. But there's a line in it where it basically says, "I'm not going to have any of that on my boat. I'm not going to have anybody disagree with me or talk, or that sort of thing." And again, creates a sort of hostility with Mr. Slim, which may not have needed to have been in there because of how nasty he treats them from the very beginning. As soon as Mr. Slim starts talking negatively towards him, and when talking about, hey, there's the core is going to be frozen. The poles are going to be cold, right? All the ships that we've had, but the theory in Symmes' Hollow World theory is that, they're going to be cold up to about 80 degrees because of the icy ring, but we have never traveled above or below 80 degrees, so we don't know what's out that way. And it could be warm because, it's going to be closer in nighttime, right? And so forth. So you are a silly person for doubting me, even though every piece of evidence suggests that I'm wrong and that is merely just a theory and that you're correct. You're wrong for questioning me or doubting me. I'm your captain. And again, I think he creates this sort of antagonistic relationship with Mr. Sim, which Mr. Slim will then turn around and continue to push back against him for the rest of the voyage. And thus becomes the main antagonist of the story. But he's also not nice. He understands power, and he's not afraid to keep it. He's also not nice in other ways, too. You'll see him interact. He'll hide things about humanity from the people in order to show only the best light. He will keep things hidden from them intentionally. He'll sometimes tell a little bit of a fairy tale with the local Symzonians. He also will keep things that were banned. For example, one of the local Symzonians gives him some pearls. They use pearls down there. They're so common because there's just massive amounts of shellfish and oysters, and they regularly eat oysters. And pearls are actually crushed into a paste and then painted into the inside of houses to kind of as basically a sealer for the house that they've built. So it's in most of the inside of their buildings. And he was seeing this, and he asks for some of the pearls, and the guy gives him like a handful of pearls. And he just kind of secures from his pocket. Well, later on, the king is going to say, "Hey, we did all this investigation on your culture, and we realized that you're just so materialistic and so forth, and we're going to ban you guys from taking anything home that might incite people to come back here because their greed's going to take them, right? And they're going to be mean, nasty people." So he has a list of things that they're not going to let him take back because they're valuable, based on all the things that they had read from the exchange of information that had happened previously, and they assessed it. So they inspect the boat and make sure that there's no pearls and remove any pearls they find. But the captain doesn't give up his pearls; he takes them back home with him, as one example. And even as he's leaving, he's like, "But I knew I'd still be rich because I had all these seal. I wouldn't be able to take back pearls, but I'll be able to take back like seal honors, seal coats and such. I'm still going to be a rich man. I'm going to be welcomed in every court. I'm going to be celebrated as better than Columbus, because Columbus only found a continent. I found the continent in the inner world. I'm better than Columbus, and people are going to love me for it." He's this self-serving guy the entire story long. He's not a nice character. He's also I also do think that there are some casualties of the time, too. For example, this isn't a pre-slavery concept, but there's really only one time that slavery is mentioned, well, actually twice. One in a quick throwaway line when he says there's no slavery here, and then the other when they condemn him for slavery, but his people, but also it's just one sentence out of many. But it is a part of that, obviously an 1820 novel isn't going to condemn slavery. That's written by and for an American audience. It's barely going to mention it because of how divisive an issue it has become. The second is females in the novel, of which there are none. He has a mention in the first chapter about leaving his wife and daughters, so that is technically a mention. And they come back for another paragraph later on in the third act when he gets back home, and that's it. There's no other mention of women in the story at all. In the title of it's Best Man, he talks about how people could be sent back in the Symzonian. He never encounters Symzonians. There's nobody on the boat that's not a man. He never encounters a Symzonian who's not a man. None of the people that he interacts with, none of the people that talk about him, nothing that he reads about has women. The only paragraph that even talks about women in Symzonia is a paragraph late in a sort of Symzonian regalings about their culture that says that women are equal in their society, but there's nothing that shows that that's actually the case. Clearly, I think that was just a throwaway paragraph he put in there because of how egalitarian the society was. I think he realized he probably needed to put something about the nature of women in that society, but then you don't see it at all. He doesn't go back and add them back in or have any conversations with them afterwards. They're just not a part of the story at all. Women do not exist in this novel. They're not on the ship. They're not mentioned as characters. He doesn't even give the name of his wife or his daughters. He never longs to see him again or wishes his journey had been shorter. Nothing, right? You're getting nothing of him as a husband. He is of them as characters at all. They don't drive the story. Nothing drives the story that's a female. And you never meet any of them in Symzonia either, even though technically there's a paragraph that talks about them in the society and their roles in society. There's a paragraph, one paragraph. Even the best man is not a best person. The title of the person who runs it. There are places that say, hey, bachelors who are unmarried for a long period of time will be sent out too, because they are obviously people that do not have the society's best interests. It doesn't say women or people who have not gone married or bachelors or something else like spinsters or something like that. It just says bachelors. Again, assuming that men are the ones who need to get married, do things, have that sort of. So there's this even though he talks about the society being egalitarian, and there's a paragraph, even there he uses male terms to talk about how this society views themselves. So even though he has this mention that women are equal in their society, there's nothing that shows it. Not a single line or sentence that actually shows that that's the case. So there you are. So there you are. It's a fun story. It's a decent read. You can read it probably in about 2.5 hours because of how short it is as a narrative. There are some interesting science fiction aspects to it, from the brand new ship to the flying ships to the engines of defense. There are some science fiction elements in it, although there aren't many, but they're there. And so it does make this sort of an early proto-science fiction storyline. This is clearly being written with a reason, right? It's being written for two reasons. Anytime somebody writes a utopian work as opposed to a dystopian work, they're trying to say, hey, these people are better than us, right? We should aspire to be like them. And you get that here too. You get a lot of social commentary from their works and the world that he creates down there. The second is obviously that, hey, a hollow world exists, Symmes theories are correct, that just came out a couple of years ago are right, and you should pay more attention to this guy. So that's also clearly a thing too. Like when attacked by his people for, hey, what do you like for example, early on, when Mr. Slim's like, hey, that's where it's really cold out, and he says, not according to Symmes' theories, look. And he talks about the icy ring, which nobody had ever talked about before, had never been proven to be between the 70th and 80th parallel, because that's where the last bit of daylight is on a daily basis. And then after you get past that, where daylights are months long rather than the normal setting of the sun, that's when the weather will change according to Symmes' theory. So he says, but not according to these things, not according to the Symmes theory. And he just says it like it's a matter-of-fact thing. In fact, he'll even denounce this guy for being ignorant and an idiot. Only an ignorant idiot would doubt knowledge. That's that obvious in front of them. So there are these little places here and there that say, hey, look, Symmes' theory is real. You should definitely take it for granted. So there are two separate levels of didacticism in here where he's trying to have a point. And one of those points is the utopian, which is about half the novel, and the other half is the journey there and back again, which helps to prove that Symmes' theory actually was true and that these things actually exist. All right, so there you are. Again, I'll link you to it if you've never heard of it or you want to check it out. Please feel free to do so. Have you read it? Have you ever heard of Symmes' theories of Hollow World and so forth? I'm happy to talk with you more about it. If you liked it, let me know what you thought about it. Whether you disagree or disagree with my thoughts on it, I'm happy to do that for you. And hey, if you like this, please feel free to hit that subscribe button because we're going to have so many more of these videos, especially reviews, to follow. And finally, hey, if you watch this video all the way to the end, I just want to thank you for taking some time out of your day. We all have such busy days. You know, we all have so many things happening, so many things that are pulling us in different directions. So the fact that you spent this time with me is something I really appreciate.